Okay, this is template creation / PowerForm. The first, probably 2/3 of the session will be how to create a template. The last third will be about the how to create a PowerForm. And Jesse, if you can just walk through from the beginning how they would access DocuSign and then get started and use one of our forms on this, and then we can do follow-up working sessions if needed.
Okay.
Take
and
it away.
Has everyone been privy to DocuSign 101? Or have they already gone through DocuSign 101?
We did do a DocuSign 101 session.
Okay.
Brian, should most everyone have gone through that who are on this call, or make that assumption?
We actually missed that one.
Oh, you know what? You know what? That is right. They, thank you. They came from another e-signature tool. They saw the light and came to DocuSign. So as you're going through the template, they're already familiar with e-signature, but they're not familiar with necessarily with DocuSign.
Okay.
So that's a good point.
Okay, so maybe start with maybe a 15-minute DocuSign 101.
Sounds good. Yep.
Okay.
Actually, we've recorded our own 101. If you just want to jump right into template creation, but just how to get to the demo environment would be helpful.
Okay. And the reason why I ask about the DocuSign 101 is because the topics build on each other and templates are used to create envelopes. So I'd want to make sure that everyone has a good understanding of what an envelope is, recipients, documents, all the different components that go into an envelope.
Yeah, we have that recorded on our own.
Okay. Perfect. All right. So we'll go ahead and get started.
Yes.
All right. So welcome, everyone. So today we're going to be going through DocuSign template training. And as Carrie mentioned, this is interactive, so feel free to take yourself off mute, ask a question, but please mute yourself after the question is asked just to avoid noise. So to log into DocuSign, let's start here first. If you go to DocuSign.com, one thing to note is this login button in the upper right-hand corner will log you into production. Now, we have a demo environment where you could be added to essentially do some testing, build your templates, and then when you're ready, you can download those or export them and then import those into your production account. And the reason why we typically encourage that is because demo is free. You can kick the tires as much as you want, whereas in production, you are using real paid envelopes.
Yeah.
So up here in the corner, when you do click login, also a thing to note is because you do have a separate login button for production, which is here, and I'll show you where the demo one is at here in just a moment. But because they are completely separate environments, that means the login credentials could potentially be different depending upon how your admins have you set up as users. So just something to be aware of. So what you'll do is click on the Solutions tab or hover over this, and then go to Developer Center. Now, you don't have to do this every time. Ideally, you should bookmark the demo link and then bookmark the production login URL so you don't have to navigate every time. But now, once we've clicked on Developer Center, we're now here in our Developer Center. And in the upper right-hand corner now, we can go to Sandbox. This is where you would click to log into production. And then from here, the system will behave just as normal as you'd find in production. So just something to be aware of. Make sure that you're logging into the right domain or the right URL. Okay, so go ahead and click continue. Let me log in. All right.
And also, I'm sorry, just so that everyone's aware, I did put this in the chat window. I did go ahead and mute everyone because we were getting a lot of background noise. If you can't get yourself on mute, off mute, please just chat. Let me know that, and I'm happy to take you off mute if you have a question.
Perfect. Thank you, Carrie. All right, so when we're here on our home screen in DocuSign, this is where we create an envelope from by clicking this New button. This New button is for creating envelopes, and you can use a template to create an envelope, and that's what I want to demonstrate for you first, is just so you understand kind of with the end in mind where we're going for this session, I want to show you first a couple different ways that a template could be utilized to create that envelope that you're going to send out for signature. But the whole point of the template is, think of it as just kind of like a reusable process. It's essentially kind of like a draft envelope already. So you have your documents as placeholders already loaded into your template. you have your recipients, and you have all the corresponding fields that you want those recipients interacting with on the document or signing already placed there. So the whole intent of a template is you as a sender to save you time from having to go through all those steps, and you can simply pick a template to create an envelope. So let me show you a couple different ways just so you can have that in mind as we're going through the template creation process. So I can either click Use a Template, or I can go to my Templates tab up here, find the appropriate template, and then click the Use button next to it. So let's pretend we're using this time off request form that I want to send out. I can just click Use. And this brings up a simplified sending view where pretty much it's just asking me for my recipients and names and emails. And then if I don't need to preview the fields because they've already been placed on the form for me via the template, I could just go ahead and hit send, and immediately that envelope would go out with everything in there. But let me click Advanced Edit just to show you all the components that were already added simply by applying our template to this envelope. We can see here now that in this envelope, we already have a placeholder document pulled in here, this time off request form. I also have a secondary document here. I have all my recipients, and all I need to do now is add the names and emails. So let me do that real quick. We can specify the subject line, body message, everything that you went through in the DocuSign 101 and how to create the envelope, or you'll see when you go back and watch the recording. All those steps are essentially the same, but as we can see here, the template has done its job, saving us time from having to load in the documents, build our recipient workflow, create some custom messaging, and when we go on here to the next screen, we can see a plethora of fields have already been placed. Conditional logic has been applied. All this advanced stuff has already been pre-configured and set up, again, saving you time. So now I can just hit send, and it can have that envelope be created and off on its merry way to the recipients to sign. So that's one way to use a template, is with the idea in mind where you simply want to say, hey, I want to use this template, which also means the static document that you already have preloaded in the template was pulled in. Now, the second most popular way of using a template is I can go here to send an envelope. And if I click use a template, that's really just going to apply all the template settings like you just saw. So a couple different ways to, quote, use a template, end quote. But what I want to show you is what happens if we want to upload a custom form. So like, let's say you're uploading a document from your computer, and you want to send that version out for signature instead of the static placeholder document that was sitting inside the template. Oops, I uploaded the wrong form, so let me click upload, and there we go. So where I'm going with this is we can essentially, you can upload your customized form, and then you can apply your template settings on top of this custom document, which means it would ignore the static version of the document that is sitting in your template, so it wouldn't have the same behavior like I just demonstrated for you a few moments ago. Instead, we've uploaded our custom form, and we want to say just ignore those static documents, but apply all of the rest of the template settings on top of my custom form that I just uploaded. So pull in everything from the template except for the static document. Let's ignore those, and let's apply everything on top of my customized form. So what I can do is after I've uploaded that form, I can just click Apply Template, come in here, and I can pick the appropriate template that I want to apply, and it would pull in all of those components. So let's just do this. And as we can see here, it didn't pull in those two documents from my template. It kept it that document that I uploaded instead. But all the recipients, the same workflow that you saw, the messaging, and if we go on to this next screen, we can see all the fields were placed on top of my customized form instead. Now lastly, on the same note, we do also have template matching. So just keeping this in mind with how you want to build your template is really why I'm showing this all to you in advance, so you can just understand how a template works and why we're going to be talking about some of the things we are going to talk about. So the other way to utilize a template is if I go to send an envelope and I just upload the document from my computer, That screen that I ignored the first time, I want to show you now, this pop-up for template matching. Essentially what this is when you upload a document into DocuSign, if you have template matching enabled, what we're doing is when we see you've uploaded a document, we have intelligent document recognition going on. So we're going to be scanning the first 25 words and the last 25 words in that document to see if someone on your account has already built and shared a template based around that document. In other words, we're trying the best we can to save you time and find the right template that you want to apply to your document. So that's what this pop-up is. It's just letting me know, hey, by the way, we found many templates that match this document. Do you want to apply one of them? And you can change your threshold settings, but like mine right here, these show that these two templates are 100% match for the document that I uploaded. So I already know this is the template I want to use. I can just click apply. And again, same concept as me applying a template to my custom document is it ignores the static versions of the docs in the template. And we'll just apply all my other template settings on top of my customized form here. Okay, so now that I've showed you that, let's just dive into creating a template. So you want to start on the Templates tab at the top of the screen here. Now, if you don't see a Templates tab at the top, please ask your DocuSign administrator to grant you template permissions via the permission sets in the admin controls. So what I want to do is I want to click on this New button. Now, this is where some folks often get confused as well, because you have a few different options here. Upload template, what some people typically think is, oh, I have a form, I want to upload it to DocuSign to build my template. That is not what this button is for. This button is simply for exporting your templates from, say, this demo account to then coming into your production account and importing that template so you don't have to rebuild it in both environments. Okay, so probably only an admin is going to use this upload template button, just to be aware. So if you do want to upload a form and create a template, we want to go with this first option, create template. Okay. Now another important step right here is we're going to follow all these different sections one thing at a time, just like we do when we're building an envelope in that you see in the DocuSign 101 recording. So we want to give our template a name. This is going to be how users will identify which template they want to use on the account. So it's important to be very specific and granular in your naming convention. So maybe start with like the department or use case, etc. Okay. Template description is optional, but there are users on your account that could potentially might need to go into your template and make edits in the future. Say you're out of the office for a week and the form has updated. Well, we want others to be able to know how you built your template and maybe some of the thought process that went into it, because that may help them know what items that they should update when they need to update your template. Or specifically, if you've gotten approvals for a very specific workflow or the way you have the template configured, maybe make a note of that here and say, please don't touch this section or these specific settings. So this can be very helpful for anyone on the account that might need to edit the template in the future to know what they should or shouldn't be doing. All right, so now the steps are going to be fairly similar to creating an envelope, but we're going to have the big picture in mind of this is going to be a reusable envelope, i.e. a template. So I'm going to go ahead and click upload. Let's upload that same document that I've been using as my example. Now your template, as you saw, you can have multiple documents in your template. So just like an envelope, you can put as many in here as you want. But again, we're thinking big picture, so just think about what documents and what order those documents should be in anytime someone utilizes this template. And also be thinking, are users going to be needing to send out the static versions of the documents that are in the template? Or are they going to be uploading their own customized versions, then applying the template on top of those documents? So you always want to keep that in mind, is the intended use for the specific use case or department that might be using DocuSign. So now let's take a look at our recipients. So again, just like you saw in DocuSign 101, you can set up a sequenced routing order. Now right here we actually have one recipient placeholder added. So just one recipient. We haven't specified what their role is or who they are. So let's actually just start here first. So let's say my document requires 2 signatures. So I want to set up a template that could accommodate for 2 signatures. Right. So right here, under role name, what we want to do at the template level is again, thinking about the reusability of the template is, do we want the senders populating the name or email for this individual? Or do we want to populate it in the template level, meaning that it could potentially be that same person that you want receiving the envelope to sign every time someone uses this template? So if we want it to be different, the name and email, then we want to leave name and email blank. So I would only pre-populate names and emails if you want it to be that same recipient anytime the template is used. But for the role name, what this is going to serve for is simply as a placeholder, because it's going to serve as the prompt for the sender to know what name and email goes in the correct spots. So for example, if I know that maybe for this time off request form that I'm using as the example, maybe we have an employee that fills it out and signs it, and then it maybe goes to their manager for an approval signature. So for the first role, I might put employee. Okay, so it really doesn't matter what you use as the role name. It's whatever role name that you would know is going to prompt the sender to know the correct name and email to put for, say, the employee. Right? So this could be department director, it could be whatever you want to call it. Now, because I mentioned in my example I have 2 signers, so I'm going to click Add Recipient. And right here, maybe I'll put Manager. Okay. So now looking at this, we can see the sender is going to be asked to populate the name and email for both the employee and the manager. But we have this set up right now in parallel routing, meaning that both of these recipients would get the envelope at the exact same time. So with this example, again, I want the employee filling this out first, and only after they're done signing it, I would then want it going to the manager. So I need to set up what's called sequential routing or assigning order. So if I click on this little box, we can see some numbers now appear to the left of the recipients, and this allows us to set up a very specific sequenced workflow that we want the recipients filling out the document in a specific order. So in this case right now, we have it set up so the employee would get the envelope first, they fill it out, sign it, and only after they're done signing will it then be routed on to recipient number 2 here, in this case the manager. And then after the manager's done signing, we don't have anyone else in the workflow, so that would indicate that the envelope would be marked as completed, assuming we get both signatures, and before the expiration date, and you can save a copy from there. A little helpful hint though, if you have a more elaborate workflow, you can use this little signing order diagram just to get a quick visual aid to know how you have your routing order set up. And then of course you can mix and match sequential routing and parallel routing. We still want to have this set up right here, but you can make these numbers the same. So if I knew that after the manager signs, maybe it needs to go to a department head or something, then I can just maybe put this as sequence number 2, if it's okay for maybe the department head and the manager to be signing it simultaneously. And if I click on the signing order diagram again, we can see now how the workflow has updated to reflect that change. All right. So now the other thing to look at is we need to decide what do we want our recipient roles to be. And when I say recipient roles, again, I'm not sure who's all gone through the DocuSign 101, but we do touch on this again here in the templates. But what you're deciding here is essentially what action do we want the recipient taking. The word recipient is very vague and kind of generic. It just means you're receiving the envelope. But right here under the recipient role types, this is specifying what your role in the signing order is going to be. Are you going to be a signer, meaning are you signing your name? Are you maybe providing some text or filling out some text boxes? All of those activities would be a signer. In-person signing would be if you're wanting to be like the signing host, and the real signer for the document might be standing in front of you. And instead of having them check their email and click on a link to sign the document, maybe you just want to pull up the document on your device as the host, swivel it around to them, have them sign on your device, and then hand it back to you when they're done. and then you take back control of your device and the signing ceremony is completed. Think of this like when you're signing a contract in the store or something like that, where you're signing on the business's device and then handing it back to them. That's a great example of an in-person signing session. And then we have a carbon copy recipient. They don't have to do anything. They just simply get a copy that they can click on and view. Needs to view is like a certified delivery. So they literally have to view the document before it would be routed on to the next individual. So it's a great way just to pause the workflow temporarily if you need to put like a stopgap at some point in the workflow. Now these last three are more kind of managerial tasks for the envelope itself. These do not control editing the document itself or any of the data on the document. These simply control, they provide you the flexibility to have kind of like a loosely defined process. So let's just say in this case, maybe we know who the employee is that's filling out the document, but maybe we don't know which manager needs to sign until after they fill it out and make appropriate selections. It might require a special approval, don't know. Situation could be different, but what if we want to have someone maybe put in between these two recipients that would review what the employee signed the document with, and then based upon that, have that person that's sandwiched in the middle be able to dictate which manager it should then go to. So in other words, having a reviewer kind of sandwiched in between these two signers. That's what those other advanced roles would be used for. So just to show you a quick example, if I wanted to go ahead and set it up like that, go ahead and put a recipient put in between. Let's call this reviewer. And we could use one of these recipient role types. For instance, specify recipients. This would mean after the employee signs, it goes to the reviewer, they look at it, and then their task only is not to sign the document, but rather to only provide the name and email of the manager. Now these other ones give you a little bit more flexibility depending upon what you're trying to accomplish. Update recipients would be used if you know that the sender is going to populate the name and email for both the employee and the manager, but you still want a reviewer to review the document and just make sure that it's still the appropriate manager that was originally addressed. And if it's not, then let's update recipients. And that's what that would allow them to do, is change who it was originally assigned to. Allow to edit gives the most flexibility in terms of making a correction or an edit to the envelope. But again, don't get this confused. This does not mean editing the document. This simply means after the employee signs, as the reviewer, I'd look at the document and I would decide, are there corrections that need to be made to the workflow? Maybe do we need to add in additional signers, remove or edit signers? Or maybe we need to add in additional documents that weren't thought of, or maybe you didn't realize were initially needed when you sent it out. But you now need to append on 2 or 3 more documents. That's what the allow to edit functionality would enable you to do. Now the caveat to allow to edit is that you do have to have a DocuSign license. So typically this allow to edit role would be someone internally that you have as a user on your DocuSign account. All right, so now looking at this, under the More dropdown, we get to decide also, do we want to add authentication? Now I know you saw this in 101, but however, I wanted to show you that you can set this up in advance in your template. Because again, the whole point of the template is that maybe we don't want senders needing to know how to configure authentication, or maybe we want to build our template in such a way where we don't want the senders changing any of the settings in how we build the template. Because if you think about it, you spent all this time building the template, making sure it meets your business requirements. And so let's make sure that some functionality isn't available. For example, what if we don't want the sender accidentally sending out this envelope without adding a layer of security on the envelope? Okay, so to prevent that, we can click on this little checkbox here in our template that says require an access code for the recipient. And that would mean the sender has to provide the name and email, as well as the access code, or else they will be prevented from going on to the next screen and clicking the send button. Okay, so it just helps remind them of the steps that you want them taking. And same thing, we could pre-configure saying that we want the employee to go through phone authentication. And then we can go ahead and save our template, and then before the sender sends out the envelope, they'd have to provide the recipient phone number. And of course, you can add a private message in advance, so if it's like a canned message with some instructions that you only want a recipient seeing, you can add that, of course. Under these advanced options, though, this is what I want to point out. You don't have these advanced options in an envelope. Again, what do we want the senders being allowed to accomplish? So right here under recipient modification, these are the controls you'll see on your account. So don't allow senders to edit the recipient. What that means is that they would not be able to modify anything that you've selected or configured in advance. Meaning anything that's left blank, they're still going to be providing it. So like the name and email, they would still be forced to provide that. Same with this access code, they'd still be forced to enter the unique access code for this individual. But what they would not be able to change is, for example, the type of authentication. They couldn't change it from access code to SMS or delete it in general. They also would not be able to change the type of recipient they are. So maybe instead of getting away with a process that shouldn't be followed, we don't want them changing the signer to a carbon copy where they're not asked to sign the document. Okay, so just thinking about things like that. And then further, do we want the senders being able to delete the recipient, being able to click on this X and remove them and their corresponding fields from the document 100%? Typically, again, if you're building a template, you can mix and match. You might have some recipients that you can say, okay, I want the employee signing this 100% of the time. For the manager, yes, I know it needs to be non-editable, can't delete it. But then maybe you have a third individual here that's called like a, let's just call this the department head again, where maybe this is variable. You want to have a signature already put and placed on the document on the next screen just in case this individual is needed. But if we don't lock down the advanced settings and say that they can't delete the recipient, if we know that the employee and the manager are 100% required, let's lock them down. But let's not lock down the department head because we might still want the sender deciding, okay, maybe the department head signature is not needed, so let's click the X and delete them. Okay, so it's thinking through things like that in terms of which recipients are needed versus which ones might need to be removed. Okay, all right. So now we can come down here to past recipients, and now we get into just some final settings before we get onto the tagging screen where we have a lot of fun talking about the different fields you can place on your form. So the first thing to look at right here is what's called envelope custom fields. Now I might open this question up for the admins on the account. Are you going to be having your users populate envelope custom fields, or has that been determined yet?
We don't have any custom fields currently.
Okay. Would you like me to explain what these are, or should that be saved for an admin session?
No, you can explain it. It's fine.
Okay, thanks. All right, so an envelope custom field, the easiest way to describe it is it's like adding like a tag or a hashtag to your envelope. Essentially, you're adding metadata to your envelope for post-processing purposes. So that could be for reporting purposes, or it could be for automated post-processing where basically once a document is done, we send it to your web listener. Your web listener would then maybe look for any data to know maybe which account it should be associated with or a specific record ID in your database. So the envelope would come back to you carrying that message. In this case, I have an example of a student ID. So just to keep it very applicable here, when an envelope is completed, we send you an update saying, hey, your envelope 1234 is completed, and here's the student ID for that envelope. It's, I don't know, 9876. And let's query our system and say, look in our SIS system, where is student 9876? And once we find it, we now know immediately, or you know immediately then, which record to save a copy of that completed document to. Or when you run a report, maybe you want to pull a report and say, hey, how many envelopes have we sent to this one particular student? You can then just query in your report for a certain student ID, and see exactly how many envelopes were sent for them. If you don't add an envelope custom field, then really you're only reliant on being able to search on envelopes based upon the name or email of the recipients, or perhaps a keyword that your senders are adding into the subject line. So the reason why I mention these envelope custom fields is, as we can see, they are here at the template level. An admin does have to set them up behind the scenes in the admin setting. But if you do have these custom fields, essentially you can force your senders to pre-populate unique identifiers, or these could even be drop-down menus with your own custom values that they select from, like maybe selecting the use case or the department, etc. So just anything that you want to think of that could be useful metadata for post-processing in the future. That's really the only thing to keep in mind here. Okay, so now we can go down to the message to recipients. Now, we want to kind of think about, do we want the senders being able to customize the subject line, maybe add in something unique if you're not using an envelope custom field? Now, one thing that we do have to help with this is we have a merge field, and if you click in your template in the subject line, you should see this little gray arrow. And if we click on that, remember the different role names we put up here, employee, manager, and department head? We go down here, we can see we can insert the merge field for any of those roles, including the name or email of any of those individuals. So let's just say I want to put the employee's name in the subject line, just to keep it clear as I'm getting the email notification updates, letting me know how that envelope is progressing. Anytime I look at the subject line quickly, I want to know who it's related to know if it's urgent, if I need to hop on that and follow up with them or something. So I can click employee name, and this would automatically pull in the full name for the employee, whatever the sender populates right here in that name field in their envelope. Okay, so you won't see anything populated here. This is just a merge field, but it is helpful just to automatically add some sort of uniqueness to an otherwise non-dynamic subject line. And then looking at the advanced options, I won't belabor the point on these since you should have seen these in the DocuSign 101, but we can determine in advance at the template level, hey, do we want to allow recipients that receive envelopes created from this template to be able to sign on paper? Or do we want them to be able to reassign or change the signing responsibility to someone else on their own, or should they reach out to me, the sender, and ask me to make a correction on the envelope? And then, of course, you can have your different reminders and expiration settings if your admins are allowing this, or really any of this functionality. But the thing to point out here at the template level is you can also password protect your template. Now, an admin doesn't need a password to delete or edit your template in any way. This password is used to protect against maybe other senders that also have template creation privileges. So you don't have full admin rights, so you can create templates, but you might also be able to edit other people's templates. So if you don't want others modifying your template without you sharing your password explicitly with them, then I would go ahead and password protect your template. And again, this all comes down to your business requirements and what your admins want you doing. We can pre-select which brand, the logo, and colors we want used for certain templates. So maybe you have different use cases that might require a different logo or color scheme. You can leverage that. But showing you the template modification here, this would be if we wanted to lock down a lot of these elements universally here in this single template. So like right here, don't allow senders to edit, add, or remove recipients. Now, if you recall, I showed you how we do that individually per recipient, which is generally how I recommend doing that. But if you know that, hey, I'm building a template and I don't want anyone touching the recipients in any way, shape, or form, you can just lock it down with one click here. Or any of the messaging, the subject line, email body message, or any of those private messages. And same for the branding, if we don't want them changing the logo and colors. So I want to show you just some other functionality, so I'm actually going to undo that. All right. So now when I'm ready, I go on to the next screen, and then this is where I'm going to be adding my fields. So again, same thing that you saw in 101, and sorry to keep mentioning that, but you drag and drop your fields onto the document. So the concept is essentially the same as creating an envelope. Again, we're just doing this in advance so that the senders don't have to. So let's just talk about some of these different fields and then their corresponding best practices for modifying some of the field attributes. So always make sure that you're placing the fields for the correct recipient. So remember this drop down up here in the upper left. We select which recipient we want to place fields for. So in this case, I can see all these fields over here. If I drag and drop any of these, they are going to be assigned to the employee. And that little yellow dot, the yellow fields, all indicate that and tell me that. And over here on the right-hand side, notice when I click off of the field, that attributes or property menu goes away. But when I click on it again, it pops back open. Now in this property menu, these are giving me all the properties for this specific field. So since it sounds like you're coming from another electronic signature service and you might have used like tools for building Adobe forms, similar concept. You can adjust some of the attributes for the fields. And one of those attributes is the recipient. So if maybe I place this field here accidentally and this should belong to the manager, for example, I can just click on this drop down and then change this to manager, and we can see now the colors change. The other option is I could have just selected manager up here and then just dragged over a signature for them, and it's automatically assigned to them. All right, so that's signature. Pretty straightforward. Also for these, you can resize the boxes to make the signatures smaller if you need to fit in a smaller space on your document. And then same thing for initials. We can size this down. And you can make fields required or optional. There are a couple caveats to that I'll mention when we get to them. But we can also change the formatting. A data label is something that I always recommend as a best practice at the template level. Again, we're building this template once, ideally. So all these settings that you spend a lot of your time on configuring your template, the more you fine-tune your template, the better use out of it you're going to get. Because we're thinking reusability and scalability. So when people use this template, how do we want our documents coming back? Again, the more time you put into building it, fine-tuning your settings, and the more testing you do, the more likely you are to get your document back correct the first time and not have to deal with errors. So just be really conscientious about how you're building your template. And the reason why I mention that too is because one of the best practices is applying a data label. Just like when you're building like a PDF form or any other document, you want to name your fields just in case you ever need to export the data. Yes, you can always download the PDF and look at it that way, but what if I want to export the data from the document into like a CSV file? Or what if you want to write an integration into DocuSign where your system and our system can speak to one another and we send that data automatically to your system and your system would then know how to ingest it or consume it and know where to put it, right? So in order to do that, we have to name our fields correctly. So this field right here I might call employee initials. Now, this is also going to help tremendously if you ever want to use our formula functionality and have some fields do some automatic calculations with each other. So I have a good example right here on my form, a start date and an end date for this time off request form. Then maybe I don't want the user typing in an erroneous number, so I want a formula to automatically calculate the difference between those dates and produce a number right here that is non-editable, so the recipient can't touch it or change it. In order to set up those formulas, just like when you're writing a formula in Excel, you have to use the field names. So that's why you have to set data labels for your field. So don't forget to do this as you're adding fields to the document. Now the tooltip is like a little note. So if I'm clicked into the field, this is going to be a little pop-up that comes up giving me whatever brief instructions I type in right here. So maybe I'd just type in employee initials. Click here to add your initials. You can get as verbose or non-verbose as you like. But also this is really helpful because screen readers read this layer of tooltips. So if you're having a signer that is visually challenged sign a document, this tooltip can go a long way in helping them know what they need to key in at that spot. Location, we can talk about this later. Essentially what this is if you know you're going to be working with documents that are dynamic, meaning maybe the document that you're sending out, the layout is slightly different than what you built the template with. So what if your senders are modifying this Word document before sending it out, which might scoot down these signature blocks from page 1 down to page 2? I've seen that example hundreds of times with some of my clients. So we actually have auto-place capability, meaning that we could anchor a field to an existing keyword on your document. So regardless of if that keyword moves around anywhere on your document, DocuSign will know to follow around that string of text and place it in the correct spot that you want it following. So just to show you an example, if I have a signature field here, let's just slap it right here. And I want it to automatically be placed next to this signature block. What I can do is click on Auto Place. Now I wouldn't use the word signature because that would imply that we're going to put a signature field for signer 1 in both spots here, which we don't want to do. I want it only applied for the employee signature since it's yellow. So I'm going to anchor it to this string of text right here because it's unique for this signer. Just call it employee signature. I click Apply. We can see it relocated itself right at that field. Now if I move it right here to the correct position, if this entire document changes, but as long as this signature block is relatively the same, meaning this string of text is relatively in the same spot in relation to where this field is at right now, meaning they don't type in anything in between here and signature, then this signature block, even if this scooted down to page 300, this signature tag would follow down all the way down to page 300 and land right here, lined up perfectly on the signature line. Okay, so that is advanced functionality. I won't belabor the point on that one because we do have an advanced session that we can go into and show you a lot of cool functionality with formulas, conditional logic, and auto placement if you are going to be working with dynamic documents for any of your use cases. Now, field order is another thing to pay attention to for the ADA compliance for accessibility. For the screen readers, this goes a long way because you want to set up field ordering so it knows in a logical way how you want your fields being presented to the user. In other words, which field are they prompted to fill out next after they filled out the previous field. Now, the way we do this by default is either in the sequence that fields are placed or from left to right, top to bottom, just like reading a book. Now, if your fields are slightly misaligned, so if I had like, say, 2 text boxes right here, and they were slightly off like this, meaning this middle one is just down a little bit, the way DocuSign might see this is you fill out this field, then this field, because they're the same height, and they're above this one, so then this one would be the 3rd field going down. So that might not be the order you want them signing in. So if you want it to be this field, the middle one, and the last one, then you want to set up field ordering. So in this way, I just put a 1 here, I put a 2 here, and a 3 here. And now if I were on a screen reader, or even if I was just a normal signer signing it, I type in text in this first box, I tab over, it's going to go to this one instead of this one on the far right. Okay. Now the last setting here, for at least for signatures, and I'm going through some of these settings. Some of these repeat for many of the fields, so I'm just going to show you new ones moving forward. But like right here, we also have sender permissions for our fields. So thinking about just like we added the permissions for our recipients on the previous page, whether or not we want the senders editing them or deleting them. Same concept here. Do we want senders being able to edit any of the fields and its corresponding field properties? And or do we want them not being able to delete the field? So again, you can use these interchangeably, or you can use them both or not at all. But the way I have this set up right now is the sender would not be able to click on this field and delete it, nor would they be able to click on it and move it, or change any of the formatting properties, change the data label, all that good stuff. Okay. So again, this isn't from an angle of mistrusting your senders. This is really coming from an angle of we've spent a lot of time making sure our templates meet our business requirements. So let's make sure that people using this template follow the process that we built a template for. Because otherwise it might completely invalidate the document if you're allowing senders to make changes that they aren't supposed to. So that's really what we're trying to do here is prevent documents from coming back to you that are not in good order. Now this stamp is used like if you want a signer or a recipient getting the document, they're a signer, but instead of signing their own name, maybe you want them uploading a company seal of some type, kind of like a notary in a way, but that's what this company stamp could be used for, is if they're signing with a company logo or seal instead of their own signature. Date signed, we'd go ahead and place anywhere that you want today's current date being stamped. We won't commit the date until they actually finish filling out all their fields and click the Finish button, at which point that's the date that we will commit on the document. And then these are what we call merge fields. So these are merging in data as long as we know it. So like the name and email, we are going to know for this recipient because, so let me place it right here and then I'll finish my thought. Because this is being pulled from the recipient data. So whatever name and email that the sender specifies here for my recipient, the employee, that's where we're going to pull the name and email from. Now, if these were assigned to the manager, then it would be the manager's name and email, etc. Company and title, these are going to be just editable text fields if we don't know this information. But the way we'd recognize it is if the recipient you're sending to is a user in DocuSign, and in their DocuSign profile, they already have a company name and a job title pre-filled in their profile. If they do, then we will have this pre-populated, and you can set it to be read-only if you don't want it editable. But otherwise, if we don't recognize that recipient as an existing DocuSign user, it will just be a free type text box that you can make required or optional. Now, let's come back to the text boxes because text boxes are the most configurable and used probably the majority of the time. So let's just touch on these others real quick. Text boxes, checkboxes I like to talk about versus radio buttons because there is a difference. So checkboxes, if we look, when I drag and drop some checkboxes, we can see there's only one placed one at a time. So what this means is that these are individual fields and they are not grouped or dependent upon each other. Also, these checkboxes are always optional. You cannot make checkboxes required. The design of a checkbox was typically used in scenarios like where you want recipients selecting either all options, a few options, or none, meaning you're not controlling the number and you're not requiring how many selections they make. We do have some workarounds if you do have those scenarios on your form, but that would be like an advanced template session that we'd set up and show you how to do that. Radio buttons. If I drag and drop a radio button, we can see here how there's a little lasso going around it, a little dotted line. Now this means that these are grouped together. So this would mean we give you two out of the box by default, but you can click this plus sign to add more choices. Keep clicking it. But we can see here how all these boxes are lassoed. So this means that the signer can only click on one choice. They would not be able to click all four of these. It means they're just forced to pick one item out of the four. And then radio buttons can be made optional. They are required by default. So let's take a look at that and let's add these right down here. So that's how I would place radio buttons for a scenario like this, where I want the signer picking one choice out of these choices, but not all 7 of these. Now what I also want to do is I also want to set a data label. This is the only field that actually calls it something a little bit different. This is called a group label, because if we think about it, it makes sense. These are all grouped together, so we need to give the entire group a name. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add the corresponding values for each selection. So whichever selection they make, that's going to become the value for the field that you label as the group label. So maybe I'll call this one type of leave. And then for radio button values, this is when I'd go through and I'd set the value for each radio button. So other. Okay. Right. Now we also have drop-down menus. So if I drag over a drop-down menu, let's just say here, maybe I'm just going to put it up here. Under this options property is where we're going to configure the choices that you want in your drop-down menu. So let's say we're building a list of states. I'm just throwing a couple states in here right now. So I can either keep clicking Add Option, and I can add in all the different values that I want them to select from. Or even easier is if you already have the list, just make sure that you're copying and pasting your list separated out by semicolons. So like right here I have TX semicolon WY, and that would produce an output. It just save you a lot of clicks, essentially. So if you have a list of states, this is an easy way of building that list. And I can click List, and you can see how it does update in real time for both ways of adding your list. So now, if I wanted to make this field reusable, let me show you this real quick. You might be building a form. Let's just call this one UT state dropdown or something. If I'm building another form or a template that requires a state dropdown, well, instead of building out that list every single time, again, we want to show you ways of saving time. So I can click down here, Save as a Custom Field. Now I have to give it a name that I want users knowing what field to use if it's ever needed, so I'll just keep it called UT state dropdown. I can choose all the same properties that we see over here on the right, from read-only, required, picking a default choice, etc. But when I hit Save, on the left-hand side, way over here on the left, you can see we were on our Standards Fields menu right here, but these little gray tabs, the middle one right here is Custom Fields. If I click on that, these are going to be any fields that we've added to our document before and have customized it in enough of a way that we want to save it for reusability as a custom field. So now these are in alphabetical order, so I can scroll down and I can see, oh look, there's my state dropdown. So again, if I were building a new form that called for this field, I can just drag this over, and we can see here that all the options are already added. I don't have to spend time configuring this field again. So just a great time-saving tip. Once you customize your fields, save them for reusability later if you know they might be used or needed on another template. Okay. Now we do have payments as well. I'm not sure if you have any use cases that would need payments, but payments would be useful if you want to either have the sender type in an amount here, have the recipient type in an amount, or it can even act as a formula field if you wanted to automatically calculate some values from some other, maybe say dollar fields, and produce an output or a total here. And this is an interactive field, so what you'd basically be doing is you can set this up with a payment merchant gateway of your choice. So you have Stripe, Braintree, PayPal, a couple different options where you can allow credit card payments, bank transfers, PayPal payments, and literally force the signer to make a payment before ending their signing ceremony. So instead of validating if the payment was made after a signing ceremony was completed otherwise, you can essentially have us act as like the middleman to make sure that payment was at least initiated before we allowed the envelope to complete itself. Now you would still have to track to see if that payment went through and all that through whatever merchant you choose, but at least you can guarantee that that payment was at least initiated before the document was completed. Okay, and then lastly, these are our advanced fields. So formulas is where we'd set up that auto calculation. So for example, actually I'll come back to that. Attachments would be if we want users to upload an attachment when they're signing a document. So for example, if I sent this out, the employee would be required to click on this little button to upload whatever documentation I'm asking for. Now this little note field can be very helpful, especially for like these attachment fields, especially if you don't have verbiage on your document, letting the recipient know what type of attachment you want. And if you have a hard time updating the verbiage on your forms, the note field is used a lot just to add some additional context. Again, making sure that the right information is getting inserted where you want it to. So this note field, what I could do here is I could add a little note saying, please attach your ID as a scanned image, whatever instructions I want to add. I can then change the formatting to, let's say, have it stand out really bright and different than the other text on my document. Now, you might be worried, well, I don't want this appearing on the document, and that's okay. This actually acts like a temporary sticky note. So once the signer is done signing, in this case the employee, this note would then disappear and you would not see any of this text burned on your document or any marking whatsoever. It does go away. So great way just to add some instructions or additional context where needed. Now, approve and decline, and let me get rid of these. Approve and decline would be useful if you have a recipient, a signer, where you don't necessarily want them signing their name on the document. However, you still want them providing an electronic signature behind the scenes which indicates their approval, either to complete the document entirely or to at least move it on to the next recipient in line, meaning, hey, I looked at it, I approve it, let's move it on, but I don't want my approval being marked anywhere on the document. So that's what this would do. Essentially, the user would click on approve, and if there's no other fields for them to fill out, it would just automatically complete their signing. They don't even have to click the finish button or adopt the signature or anything. It just, you'll see it in the history behind the scenes that they indicated their approval, and then it moved on to the next person or the envelope completed. Decline would give them a little warning because decline, just like in the other options in DocuSign, declining the sign does void the transaction. So it would void the envelope. So it does give a little warning there. Okay. So that's all the different fields. Now what I really want to go into is this text box, which we haven't covered too much other than me just dragging it a couple times. So let's take a look at this. There are a bunch more options available in a text box because, again, text boxes are highly configurable, and a lot of times you're asking users to enter in other input on documents besides just text sometimes. Okay. So some of these property areas I won't go too much in depth on for ones we've already covered, so I'll just point out the ones you should pay attention to. This add text box is useful if you want to pre-populate data. If you're not pre-populating anything and the intent is you want the recipient to type in information, then I wouldn't pre-populate anything here. But this is useful if you want to have a field on the form which becomes, again, metadata for the transaction. Maybe you want to have the department name pre-populated or the name of the form, something that isn't on the document already, but that you also don't want the recipient typing in. So let's just use a DocuSign field, a text box, to pre-populate some data or some text and just add it to the document. Now, if we don't want it being interactive, we can uncheck required field and we can make it read only. So that way it doesn't even have the border around it like we see now. When we send this out, we would just see the raw text appear as if it were typed in directly on the document, even though it's not. It's just text we're using and pre-populating with a DocuSign field. Now we can also set a character limit. Now the one formatting property I didn't cover yet, actually two formatting properties, is this hide with asterisks and a fixed width. Now talking about fixed width and the character limit, these are things you want to keep in mind as well. If I don't set a fixed width and I allow 4,000 characters, well, the size of this field is definitely not big enough to accommodate 4,000 characters. So what would happen is, because I don't have fixed width enabled, when the user is typing into this field, it will auto expand out to the right. So now that becomes problematic if I have a situation like right here, where if they're just typing and typing and typing, their response could overlap the existing text on our document in the background. So you'd have text overlapping your end date right here. So what you want to do is size your fields however lengthy you want them going out to, and then set a fixed width. Now, even if I allow a character limit of 4,000, this means this field would not expand beyond this point. But if I'm allowing 4,000 characters, again, they're going to be allowed to type up to 4,000, so it is going to appear like that data is truncated or cutting off and disappearing into the document itself. Now, you can always export that data or download it, and you can see what the full response was. But again, just some things to keep in mind when you're adding text fields in terms of how do we want data coming back to us and how much data. So in this case, start date, I know that's probably not going to be more than 20 characters, even with like some dashes and things like that. So let's set a character limit of 20. So remember these two settings in conjunction with each other. Now, this hide text with asterisks is used anytime you're working with like level 1 data, as universities often call it, or PII data, personally identifiable information. So that could include names, middle initials, date of births, social security numbers, anything that could help identify an individual is considered PII. So if we're ever intending on downloading this PDF and sharing it with anybody else, and I should say you rather not me, if you're intending on doing that, we have to think about the audience that you're sending the PDF to. Should they be allowed to see, say, some of that sensitive data exposed on the document? If not, well then maybe you want to think about downloading that sensitive data like in a CSV file or having an integration pull it down. But on the PDF itself, we can actually hide it or mask it by clicking this hide text with asterisks. So watch this. We can see here how that changed to asterisks. So anyone looking at the PDF would not be able to see the real value that was typed in right here. So we can always talk about that later if you like, handling data in different ways, but this can be useful, especially for things like sensitive numbers, socials, and banking account numbers. Okay, so what I want to do, and actually I'm going to change this around. Let's do this. And let's put a data label. So let's do start date. We've already talked about tooltip. Validate. Okay, validation is one thing we haven't talked about yet. So validation would mean, and I'm going to change this. I'm going to delete this pre-populated data because the intent here is I'm going to add a start date to show you this example. So the validation that we can add, we have some ones that are just available right out of the box that you can select from. So like if you want to enforce one of these formats, you absolutely can use these. So like right here, I'd probably use a date format. And then I can specify a different mask depending upon your account if you have some of these options available. Okay, but what this would enforce is that if I try typing in some normal text like letters or other special characters besides just the forward slashes, I would not be able to. It would give me an error and not let me finish signing until I correct my entry. Okay, so this validation is not reformatting what was typed in. This validation is just making sure that what was typed in is in the format that you've selected or specified. And if it's not, we're going to prevent them from signing until the signer makes the correction and puts it in the proper format we're looking for. So something cool that you might want to talk with your admins about if you're not familiar with this is you can click on custom, and we do have the option for a regex pattern. A regex pattern stands for regular expression, but you can see here how it almost looks like an Excel formula. It's slightly different though, but what this snippet of or regex pattern is specifying is the format and what characters are allowed in certain spots. If we want like the forward slashes after the first two numbers, things like that. It's enforcing a very strict format. So I've seen some universities format this because they have maybe a proprietary format for their employee or student IDs or department numbers or POs, things like that. Maybe it might end with a certain character or begin with a certain letter, whatever it might be. Those are prime examples of needing to write a custom regex pattern to make sure that whatever entry is in there meets your validation rule. And then you can throw a custom error message of your choice, maybe giving them an example of the format you're looking for. Okay, now collaboration. This one generally isn't advised to use this setting, but for some use cases it might be required. So collaboration is a way for you to allow any recipient in the workflow to literally collaborate on that field. So for example, I have this field, we can see it's yellow, which means it's assigned to the employee. But if I click on recipients can collaborate, what I've just done is I've basically said, hey, my other signers in the workflow, in this case the manager and the department head, they are both or actually rather all 3 of these individuals, are now allowed to modify whatever is in this field. So the employee would absolutely be required to fill this in because we have it set as required and it's assigned to the employee. But that means once it gets to the manager or department head, if they look in that field and say, you know what, there's a mistake, or I don't like what was entered, I want to change it, they could absolutely change it. Now, you could also set it a little bit more strict where you can say that any changes require initials. So meaning anyone that has, whoever the first person was that filled out this field that it was assigned to, in this case the employee, it would go back to the employee asking them for their approval, and they'd have to drag and drop their set of initials in the margin to indicate their approval. So you could end up with a cluttered document if you choose that setting, because you could end up with tons of initials stacked on top of each other if you use that setting. But again, if you don't, then the change doesn't require approval. So something to think about there. We also have this other checkbox, required field for all signers. So that means the employee fills it out, it's required for them. But if the manager gets it and it's his turn or her turn, they see it, they change or they erase what the employee filled in, they would not be able to finish signing without replacing it with some other value. So at minimum, I would recommend making it a required field for all signers. Again, depending upon the scenario, that's always different. But the majority of the time, you want to make sure that if the downstream recipient or signer changes or removes a value entirely, let's not let them finish unless they replace it with some other value if a value is needed right there. Okay. And then conditional logic, let's actually show you this one right now before I go into formulas real quick. So what if I have a field right here, a text box that I want required if they choose this other option for the type of PTO they want to take? If they choose any of these other 6 options, fine, continue, let's let them finish. But if they choose other, I want them to specify what type of leave they're taking. So if I leave this field right there, this text box is going to be required 100% of the time. And if I make it optional, well, that means if they choose other, we're not forcing them to fill it out. So how can we bridge that gap and make it required only when they select other? And that's through conditional logic. So what we want to do when we set up conditional logic is start with the field you want to trigger off of, meaning what's the parent field that is going to dictate what child fields appear based upon its selection. So in this case, we remember our radio button group. Our radio button group, the entire group, is going to become the parent field. And then this text box is our child field that we want being conditional, only when they select the other option. So I click on the fields I want to trigger off of. In other words, I just click on any of these radio buttons. And let me collapse these. And on the right-hand side, I click on conditional logic. And then there's an additional button that says create rule. All right. So we have some instructions at the top of the screen that say, click on the fields to show when the trigger field equals something. So this drop-down gives me all the radio button values that I populated. Again, another reason why you want to make sure that you're naming your fields and setting up the appropriate values as you go along. Otherwise, I would have had to have fixed this before I can set up conditional logic. Okay, so when they click other, I'm going to select that option. That's when I want this text box showing. So all I need to do is just click on this text box. We can see it's now selected because of the horizontal, diagonal lines going through it. And I click done. And now I've set up conditional logic. So now this other text box is only going to be required if they select the other option. But if they select any of these others, they're not even going to know that this text box exists. Okay, so again, we're thinking reusability and getting back data correctly the first time. Now let me show you how to set up a formula real quick, and then we'll hop on over to how do we edit a template, and then how do we share it with users once we get it built out and finalized. So I have this text box requiring a date right here. And let's just say, oops, I need a data label, so that's start date. Let's put another text field right here. We'll call this one end date. We're going to validate this one to be a date format. And this is key. When you're setting up formulas, you can only set up a formula to calculate between dates or numbers. So meaning for the validation, I would have to only choose the date option or the numbers only option. Because again, thinking about it, just like in Excel, you can only write formulas for fields that have numbers or dates in it. You can't perform calculations against text. It just doesn't make sense. Okay, so I have my two fields. They're named. I have them validated to be date only. So now what I want to do is drag over my formula field. And very simply, underneath this edit formula, we have a setup button. So I click setup, and this is asking me to write my formula, just like you would in Excel at the top of the screen. So if I click on this learn more button, this will take you to the corresponding documentation for the formula fields, aka calculated fields. And this will go over some of the same details that I just mentioned. So you have to use it with text fields, or you can use it with date sign, drop-down menus, formulas. But the moral of the story is they have to have a data label, and they have to be validated to be either numbers or a date format only. And this does give you some examples of how we follow the order of operations. You can set up some pretty complicated formulas. You can also set up some inequality formulas or true or false statements. So like right here, we could say field A plus field B plus field C is less than or equal to 100. Is that true or false once these are all added up? If it was a true statement, it would populate a 1 in the formula field. If it was a false statement, it would populate a 0. So that's actually just a little preview or alluding to an advanced session. If you wanted to get into some advanced conditional logic, you can then trigger based upon those true or false statements. So if a total was less than a certain amount, then maybe trigger some conditional fields to maybe get some additional explanation or additional signatures. But all I need to do is click into the formula field, and then I can click on my field names. But remember, this is why it's important to name your fields. You see these others that I didn't add a data label to? You'd have really no idea what those fields are representative of. But I know right here, I want to differentiate between, say, these two dates. So I can go ahead and click on date difference. We'll do the end date, comma, start date, and end the parentheses. Now I don't need to put equals or anything like that unless I wanted to create a true or false statement, or I want to maybe add on additional days or subtract days from the date total. But this is one of the functions, just like here we have our date diff. This goes into how I just built it and why, but that basically is the syntax for the formula. So then if it's a date, I probably don't want any decimal places, and I hit save. So now what would happen here is that once I put in a start date and an end date, this formula field is just going to calculate the difference between those dates and give me just one single output. All right, so that is all the fields, all the different properties. So again, just make sure data labels, if you're customizing fields to a large extent, click on Save as Custom Field for reusability later. And again, getting to your custom field menu over here on the left, you just click on these little tabs, and then you can scroll through and find your custom fields. So when I'm ready and I placed all the fields on my form, I can go ahead and click Save and Close. And then under the Templates tab, we can have our template available right here. So if I click on this little drop-down menu to the right, you can see I have a host of options. But also if I just click on the template name right here, I can get to those same choices either from these buttons right here or the More drop-down. But this screen I like because it gives me a nice preview of the recipients, the workflow, who signs first and last. I can also get a preview of the document that's in there without having to actually go into an editing view of the template itself. So if I wanted to edit my template, I do just that, click Edit, and it would take us to the same screens we were just looking at for the past hour and a half. I can also click Move if I wanted to maybe organize it into a custom folder. Now sharing is what I want to point out. So once you've built your template and once you've tested it, depending upon your permissions, you might also have this button available to share. It is an additional privilege with templates, but this is nice because if I'm building a template and I've tested it, I know it works, it meets the business process and the business requirements, I now want to share it with my users to start using it in their day-to-day. So I click Share, and I can either pick individual users on my account to say, okay, maybe I only want Adam, Alfred, and Bruce having access to this template. Now, the problem with selecting individual users is that you'd always have to keep in mind which users have access to which template. So if you onboard or offboard employees, you'd have to remember to go into every single template and update the users list. So what I recommend from an admin standpoint and template management standpoint is sharing by group if it's possible in your configuration. So your admins can organize users by group or segment them by group. And that way, as you're onboarding or offboarding users, all you have to really control is which groups they belong to. And you already have your templates set up in a way where they're shared with specific groups instead of users. So it makes template management from a sharing standpoint a whole lot easier if you're sharing templates by groups. So I can say, okay, I know Alfred and Bruce are in my, let's just say my HR group, but I might be onboarding and offboarding some other employees, and I'm just going to add them to the group behind the scenes, but anyone that's in my HR group, I want them having access to this template immediately. So click it, and done. And I can see here that it's now shared with 3 users. I can click on here, and I can see which users that it's shared with in those groups. Your admins can also track that as well. Now for this More dropdown, another cool thing to show you is, let's just say I wanted to create like a slight variation of this template. So maybe I want to keep this one in place in case these 3 signers are needed. But what if I want to create another version that might just be the first 2 signers? I can just go ahead and click Create a Copy, and this will essentially clone my entire template with all the settings we just went through, all the fields on the next page the same. But maybe for this version, I delete this department head signature. And for the name, I'll just specify in here. So I'll just say signers only, no dean required. And then I can go ahead and save and close. And now I have 2 templates, just different iterations. All right. Now that whole that template matching capability that I was showing you earlier, that is a user preference. So one thing that you can control as admins or template creators is for users that have configured the template matching in their personal preferences, we can make sure if this template is included in those match results or excluded. So if you're building the template and doing some testing, I'd probably build the template first, save it, but then come in here and exclude it from matching. So that way, even though it's on the account and admins or other template builders might be able to see it, maybe we want to just make sure it's not a direct match result if they upload a document and apply this template. You can also make sure, hey, let's make sure it's included in matching 100% of the time. And to get to those options, if you click on your little avatar picture in the upper right-hand corner and then click on My Preferences, on the left-hand side is Template Matching. And this is where you can configure your template matching settings. So do you want to match templates, yes or no? If you say yes, then when do you want to automatically apply matching templates, which if you could have maybe some false positives, you might want to review it at first. So I recommend not turning this one on initially. Do some tests and make sure your template matching is working for your documents first. So I typically have this notify me. So that's where you'd see that pop up like I showed you earlier. That gives me the match results. And then I can set my template matching sensitivity level. Again, we're matching against a lot of things like the document name that you've uploaded. Are there any images that are recognized? But mostly it's the first 25 words and the last 25 words that we're looking for some commonality between. And then page level template matching would be that if you're uploading, say, a one-page document and you built a template that was, say, I don't know, 4 or 5 pages, well, if you want to apply your template settings just to that page 1, that's what the setting allows you to do. It gets a bit more granular with template matching on a document and page level. All right, so that's it for templates. Now what I want to move on and talk about, unless there's any questions, I can pause if you want to maybe just take 5 minutes for any questions about templates before I move on to Power Forms, which are those self-service URLs.
Brian, are there any questions from your room?
Can you resize the radio button?
I think I heard a question. Can we resize a radio button?
Yeah.
Yep.
No, unfortunately not. I get that one quite a bit. Radio buttons and checkboxes cannot be resized, nor can formulas. But those items can be, you can adjust the formatting properties to reduce the font size if you need to make it smaller. But yeah, radio buttons and checkboxes, unfortunately, you can't shrink down. Any other questions? No? Okay. And if I can't hear you, it might be on mute.
This is Jared.
Okay. I'll go ahead and move on to Power Forms, and then we'll stop at the end for questions there as well. All right, so a Power Form. Let's click back onto our template here. Now, a Power Form is related to a template you already have built. The briefest way I can describe it is a Power Form is basically a URL that you're intending to maybe put on your website or share in an email, or maybe you IM it to someone, whatever. But whoever clicks on that link, wherever they click on it, instead of having a sender come in here to the console or web app and create an envelope and provide the recipient's name and email, that person gets an email to click on the link and sign. What if we want it being more self-service? And that's what the Power Form is, where if I'm an employee of your guys's and I have this time off request form and I have the link sitting on your website, the intent is I don't want to bug a sender to send me an envelope just because I need to submit a PTO request. Essentially, I can just go onto the site, click on the Power Form link, and I provide my own name and email as the employee, signer number 1, and I immediately go in and sign the document. And then after it's signed, you can have the workflow set up behind the scenes in your template to go to someone else or to specify the next person, like a reviewer like we talked about earlier. Or I can have the envelope automatically complete and notify maybe someone on your team that, hey, someone just submitted a time off request, let's have someone look at it. Okay, so that's really the intent of a Power Form, is a self-service URL that whoever clicks on it, they're signing the document immediately, so you take the sender out of the process essentially. So let's do that. Let's just create one and show you what it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and click on More, Create Power Form. And now I can give my Power Form a name simply because you might have multiple Power Form URLs associated with a single template, because we have different options that you can configure for your Power Form. So depending upon where that link is going to be placed, maybe on a public domain website versus, say, behind your firewall for an intranet site, maybe that would kind of dictate which URL. But essentially, it's pointing to the same template, just one link might be more secure than the internal link or something like that. Now the email subject, we don't have a sender crafting a subject line, so we do need to have some sort of merge field in here, just like I recommended in the template. We can use those same merge fields for the name or email for any of our recipients to automatically inject it into the subject line. And we can have some instructions here. We can change the template that it's associated with, but right now we clicked on Create Power Form under that template I just built. So I'm going to leave it as is, but you can say, oops, I picked the wrong template, and you can associate it with a different template of your choice. Okay. Now under this Options tab is where some of those advanced options are that I mentioned. So the first one is related to authentication. So this isn't necessarily recipient authentication where you're speaking with the individual and you give them a unique code that is unique to them. This is essentially kind of like a two-factor authentication where they'd have to put in their name and email, and what they're going to get is before they can sign the document, they would then get an email sent to them with a 7-digit code that they have to copy and paste back onto the DocuSign screen before they can fill out the document. And what this prevents is, say, from a student getting onto the website, clicking on the link, and submitting a form for another student or faculty that they don't like, or faculty members doing that same behavior. right? So whatever email address they put in, we want them to prove that they have access to that inbox for the email address they entered. So I always recommend this if possible, but there are some use cases where you just can't. So I understand that too. Now, usage settings. I rarely see these used, but depending upon the use case, you might need these. So if we want to limit how many times this power form, or this link rather, is clicked on and for how many envelopes are created and submitted, maybe we want to control not only how many, like the volume, but maybe we want to control the velocity and how frequently envelopes are getting created. And if it maxes out at whatever thresholds we specify, then let's basically have that link self-destruct. It'll still be visible on your site. Users can still click on it. But if it meets like a max, if we set the usage limit to say 10, this means after that link has been clicked on 10 times and people have submitted and signed the document 10 times, whoever clicks on it is going to get an error saying that this envelope is temporarily unavailable or this power form is unavailable. Same here for the usage time between responses. So maybe I want to say I only want this form submitted 10 times every week. So if it already reaches that max, say by Thursday, then they'd have to try again on Monday or whatever it might be. Okay, I'm going to turn off those. I'll leave email validation on so you can see what that looks like. But then I click create, and that's it. My power form's done. So now I have this URL that I can just copy. I also have the HTML code if you have access to like a blog or wherever you want to put this and you just want to copy the link. Here's the HTML. Most admins and IT staff want to take care of that though from our experience with universities. So I copy the URL and let's simulate what it's like to just click on the link and sign clicking on the link from your website. So your colors and your logo would appear in the upper left, but as we can see, it's a pretty generic, pretty basic page because that's really the intent. We don't want to give the person who clicked on it too many options. We just want them providing their name and email. And as we can see, the way I built this template, it's asking me for both recipients. So we could talk about different ways of if we want one person initiating it, but then we want either someone hard-coded, like a manager name and email that's always going to be the same person countersigning these forms. Maybe it would have made sense to hard-code that person's name and email in the template. Or maybe we want to put that reviewer in the process, so after the employee submits this, we have someone looking at it and then specifying the name and email for the correct manager only after the employee has submitted it and signed. Okay, so there's different things to think about, different workflows that you can accommodate for. So let me just go ahead and start this as the employee. Oops, I need to provide the manager. All right, so here's that email validation. So I can't proceed until I check my email to prove that I have access to my inbox. So let's do that real quick. So I can copy, and I can either click resume signing, or if I still have that tab or window open, I can just click back on it. Either way, I'll end up in this same window. All right. So let's see how that formula works. Let's just show you that while we're signing this. Okay. So we can see here it auto-calculates the difference, 15 days. And then right here, that conditional logic. So if I select PTO, all good. But if I select other, now this is required. Okay. So now that envelope that was created, let's look from a sender view real quick. Let's go to our Manage tab and see what that envelope looks like. So I go to my Sent Items, and I can see here this envelope that was created. I'll click on it. Let's just look at it. So employee Jesse, myself assigned, but now we're waiting on Bob to sign because we provided Bob's name and email. And I can click on the preview and see what the document looks like so far. Okay. But the question to ask yourselves here is, well, why did it end up in my Sent Items? Okay. I mean, I put in a different email. I'm not logged in as this person, so why is it in my Sent Items? Well, the answer, if I go back to the template, and when I click on the template name, now look what we have down here, Associated Power Forms. Now, if you want to, like if you've forgotten the URL, you can copy the URL. You can deactivate the link without deleting it entirely. So maybe it's already on your website, but you just want to temporarily disable it. You can do that. You can edit the Power Form settings that we were just looking at. But what I want to show you with regard to why it was in my Sent Items is this Change Sender. So if I click Change Sender, it has my name selected. Now this is actually default behavior, and what we do is whenever you create a Power Form, whoever is the person that is creating the Power Form by default is going to be the sender of any envelopes that are created via that Power Form link. So because I was the creator of the Power Form and went through all those settings and generated the URL, it specified me as the sender. So that's why anytime that link is now clicked on and someone submits it to sign, that envelope is always going to be under my Sent Items. So what a lot of universities sometimes do is they'll, I like to say volunteer or voluntold someone, whoever they want to basically help monitor those submissions. So I can maybe pick on Bruce and say, hey Bruce, anytime someone submits that time off request form, you're going to be the one that's going to help track it or to download the final copy and then put it in its in the correct resting spot. Or what some other universities will do is they'll create like a generic user on the account that's simply for the purposes of being the sender of record for any Power Form submissions or specific Power Forms. Now the issue with that is then the admin would have to set up like folder sharing on the account. So if I were a user on your account and I wanted to see the generic folder right here, let's just say it's my catch-all user. Let's just say I wanted to look at all the envelopes that were created from my catch-all users Power Forms. They'd have to go in and set up user folder sharing so I could then view that person's envelopes. So then if I wanted to then go in and see, hey, what envelopes have been created recently, let's go check that shared user. Here from our Manage tab, I could click Shared Envelopes. And as long as your admin has set up folder sharing in the background behind the scenes for specific users, I could now pick and choose which users' folders I want to look at. So I can say, oh, let's look at this catch-all folder user. Here's their inbox, nothing. Sent items, nothing. Okay, so they're slacking. But if there were envelopes and I had them associated with Power Forms, this would be a way to view them. And then when I want to return back to my view, I just click on Return to My Envelopes. But I wanted to just explain just the thought process when you're building your templates, and if you are creating Power Forms for that self-service, you have to also think about and take into account the sender that those envelopes are going to appear under and how you want to handle that, and potentially user folder sharing to have access to those envelopes if anyone else needs to log in and maybe track those or follow up with the signers if something is needed, etc. All right, so we have about 20 minutes until we are at the top of the hour. So I'll pause here. That's everything for templates and Power Forms, unless you want to go ahead and unmute yourselves, and feel free to ask any questions. And if you can't unmute yourself, also remember you can click on the WebEx chat and you can put your questions in the chat window.
Actually, so I've been answering chats, but I just unmuted everyone. So everyone, FYI, you are unmuted, so mute yourself if you don't want to be unmuted. Any follow-on questions? One of the questions that came through was if we had a date picker or a pop-up calendar option to help with data entry, and we don't.
No, unfortunately not.
And there was a question regarding the envelope custom fields. if there was a limit. And the response is there's not specifically a limit, but the more that you add can potentially impact performance. But that's with quite a few. But I don't know if you wanted to talk more about that.
No, that's spot on. The only thing to mention or to elaborate on is the performance, because yes, if you have hundreds or thousands of custom fields, then that just means that when you load your envelope tagging page or your template tagging page, we have to look into your account and we have to find all those and then list them out accordingly. So, in regards to your performance comment, yeah, it would just slow the loading of all those custom fields. But as far as I'm aware, there's no limit.
And then the question came in about can attachments include Excel documents? And Brian, one of the emails that I sent you emails on different links for DocuSign 101 template creation and admin, and one of the links in that was the file types that we support. And that's sometimes helpful just to see there's a lot of different file types we support. And Office documents or Office files are definitely some we support, but there's many others.
Yeah, and the only ones we probably wouldn't support with the attachment are going to be some of the obvious ones, like files that could contain malicious code, like JavaScript or XML, things like that. SQL statements, executable files, batch files, zip files aren't allowed. So it would have to be some of the more popular document types, so Excel, PowerPoint, PDF, Word files, text files, etc. All those should work fine. Images, JPEGs, PNGs.
I missed how they got to the power form, creating the power forms. I was taking notes. I didn't see how we got there.
Oh yeah, sure, let me show you that. So from our templates tab, because a power form is a URL that's associated with a template, we first have to click on our template. And it's under this More drop-down right here, Create Power Form. Alternatively, if I'm on my templates list, on the right-hand side, I could click on that same drop-down menu and then click on Create Power Form. Does that help?
Sure.
Yeah, that's good.
Ask about how to share. If we're making a template, we want to share it with our department.
A quick note from your admin. You are not allowed to share templates. So if you'd like that, then submit a ticket, and we will get your template and development moved over to production and get it shared out to whoever needs that template.
Are there any other questions or anything that you would like to review or go over again? I'm assuming I can sort of hear things in the background, but I'm not thinking that those are questions.
Yeah, we got an internal conversation going on.
Oh, okay, all right, that's fine.
It's formulating a question, perhaps.
Oh, okay.
Because in dev, they had the ability to put a note on a document, but it wasn't in production. So.
I think it's just something we need to submit a ticket on. We don't have comments in our production environment. So.
Oh, actually, you don't need to submit a ticket. We're trying to get that turned on. We were hoping we could get it on Friday. Because you've gone through Carahsoft, between Carahsoft and Internet 2 as a third-party vendor, there's an additional addendum that is needing to be signed. It's going back and forth between the legal teams, and I believe it's almost finished, and that we're hoping that it gets signed off this week, so then we'll get it enabled as soon as it does. We have several customers who are waiting. It can be involved, or it can be on in demo. It's just not clear to be on in production. kind of silly if you ask me, but that's the gist of it right now.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Do you have any questions about reporting? Have you looked at reporting, Brian and team?
Yes.
Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, we can give you 15 minutes back to your day.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.